Henry VIII is remembered in history for having his 6 wives and for being so brutal that he sentenced 2 of them to death, and they were executed inside the walls of the Tower of London. But there was one of Henry's wives who was considered the most fortunate of the king, and she was considered a woman who benefited greatly from her disastrous nuptials with the infamous Tudor King. Anne of Cleves was awarded a rather handsome amount of land, and she would remain in England for the rest of her life, and she was the king's longest living wife. Anne of Cleves even lived longer than Henry's son and heir, Edward VI. Anne was a queen who was close with Mary I, or Bloody Mary, as she was known, but when she died in 1557, she was given a huge funeral, and she had been considered in the aftermath of her separation from Henry VIII as the king's sister. But she was buried inside a tomb which today is hard to find inside of Westminster Abbey, and for many years it was lost. On the 16th of July 1557, Anne of Cleves, the 4th wife of King Henry VIII, succumbed to an illness which lasted for a number of months, and many historians have debated that she died from cancer. In her final days, she made her will and stipulated what should happen to her wealth and household when she passed. She made sure that the members of her household and servants that she liked would be rewarded and looked after financially after her death, and she left money for them to be given payment. Anne would also leave some jewels that she had been given from Henry VIII to Mary I, and also Princess Elizabeth, the soon-to-be Queen Elizabeth I. She was a very generous woman, and she also asked for the princess and queen to employ some of her servants inside of their own households following her death so that they would not be without a job. But Anne was very kind, and she was a woman who never had the chance to show her great qualities as a queen. But it was noted that she was very nice, and during her marriage to King Henry VIII, the king didn't value her beauty or appearance, but he did enjoy her company and gentle nature. She was a woman who had been given a lot of financial gain in the settlement following her annulment with Henry VIII, and she was awarded a large number of houses and residences. She was given Richmond Palace to live in, but inside one of these homes, Chelsea Manor, Anne of Cleves died. She passed away a year before Queen Mary I did, and before Elizabeth I came onto the throne. If she'd lived longer, it's possible she may have held a position at court. But Anne, following her death, was allowed to be buried inside of Westminster Abbey, and she was the only one of Henry VIII's wives who was given this honour. She was to be buried close to where the founders of the Tudor dynasty were buried in their vault, Henry VII and Elizabeth of York, the mother and father of Henry VIII. She was given a large funeral, and it was said she was a queen and a European princess. It was said of her funeral that, "On the 3rd day of August, my lady Anne of Cleves, sometime wife to Henry VIII, came from Chelsea to be buried in Westminster, with all the children of Westminster and many priests and clerks, and the monks of Westminster, and my Lord Bishop of London and my Lord Abbot of Westminster rode together. Many of the prominent politicians of the time attended, and there were 100 torches burning that were carried by her servants." The funeral procession was large and massive, and it was then taken to Westminster Abbey, where her tomb had been prepared and her coffin was then placed into this. Her body was also interred with a cloth of gold laid over her, and following this, the officers of her household broke their staves of office, symbolising their duty was over and done with, and then they threw these into the tomb. Her funeral had been conducted according to the Catholic faith, and she was given the Catholic rites that she wished for, and was buried inside of a tomb on the south side of the high altar. Today, during the coronation of monarchs, Anne's tomb can be seen close to the proceedings, and her monument is a low stone structure split into 3 sections. On it has ornate carvings displaying the initials AC, featuring a crown, a lion's head, and a skull and crossbones on it. It is considered that the tomb was made by a man from her native lands, Theodore Halves of Cleves. However, this was never finished, and the final touches to her burial monument never took place. It's assumed that Anne was buried inside of this tomb, and that it has never really been opened. The tomb today is very easy to miss, and it's not easy to spot inside of Westminster Abbey. You would expect that a wife of Henry VIII would have a large tomb which would have a number of Tudor symbols on it. However, this is what can be seen on the tomb and coffin of Henry VIII. Mary Queen of Scots also had a huge effigy on her tomb, but the tomb of Anne of Cleves is actually found in the peaceful sanctuary area, which is one of the most serious religious parts of the abbey, and as mentioned, the coronation ceremony occurs in this part of the abbey. Part of her tomb can be seen from behind, and this shows the inscription, Anne of Cleves, Queen of England, born 1515, died 1557, and it can be read from standing in the transept. But this area is usually off limits to the public due to its religious importance and as a place where the coronation takes place, meaning that today her tomb is not accessible and it has been lost. Also, what doesn't help is the fact that many other tombs and memorials to different people obscure and hide the tomb of Anne of Cleves. It is also opposite Edward the Confessor's tomb and is overshadowed because of his importance in the abbey. Anne of Cleves was buried within the same walls as her father and mother-in-law. Yes, she never met them, but she is also buried close to her two stepdaughters, her beloved Mary I and Elizabeth I. However, during the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II, the tomb of Anne of Cleves was actually built over and overshadowed by a temporary platform that would allow the Queen Mother to witness and view the coronation of her daughter, and she sat on this stand above Anne of Cleves' tomb. This means her tomb was temporarily hidden yet again, and when we personally visited Westminster Abbey, despite much searching, we could not locate the tomb of Anne of Cleves. She was the Queen of England who benefited greatly from her divorce agreement between her and Henry VIII, and she remained inside of England to live comfortably for the rest of her life following the death of Henry VIII. However, Anne could have returned home to Germany, and despite being queen for just a matter of months, she was buried inside the heart of England's Christian worship, and inside a church where many other Tudor queens and important figures would be buried. Her tomb inside of Westminster is very easy to miss, and it shows how important she was and how well thought of she was. Thank you for watching, and to support, please subscribe to Her Remarkable History. Thank you.